This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Jill Newbronner and here are tonight's top stories. 1 month into the Iran war, East Asia is recalibrating fast. Japan leans on coal, South Korea looking to protect its own industries, China remaining cautious while Tokyo pressing Washington to stay focused on Asia. US President Donald Trump is holding his fire again. He says he won't strike Iranian energy sites for 10 more days, insisting talks are going very well, but still no sign of a deal. China launches counter probes into American trade practices aimed at hampering the flow of Chinese products to the US. It is warning of further action to protect its interests. Washington accusing Beijing of targeting global shipping by detaining Panama flag ships in Chinese ports amid a struggle for control involving Panama's court ruling against CK Hutchison Holdings. Also in the bulletin, South Korean retail investors, known locally as ants, are piling into the stock market, even as economic and geopolitical risks mount. Is this confidence or a high-stakes gamble? And cherry blossoms that Japan gifted the United States more than a century ago reach peak bloom in Washington, D.C. Nearly a month into the war in Iran that shows little sign of an immediate easing, economies in East Asia are contending with mounting energy pressures and rising costs, with the fallout threatening a wide range of industries. Japan, in a bid to ease the strain, is turning back to coal, rolling back rules aimed at curbing greenhouse gas emissions. Now, starting in April, authorities will suspend a 50% cap on capacity utilization at coal-fired plants. While Japan has ample oil reserves, its electricity supply is far more exposed. 30 to 40% of its power generation relies on LNG, which, unlike oil, requires continuous delivery to maintain power supply. And the closure on the Strait of Hormuz has disrupted Japan's natural gas imports. Japan's relatively large oil reserves, which can cover about 8 months of domestic consumption, drawing the attention of its neighbors. Vietnam and the Philippines have asked Tokyo for help to secure oil and to access shared reserves. But Tokyo says it will prioritize the local supply before it considers aiding others. South Korea also planning to lift a cap on coal power generation capacity while increasing nuclear plant operations. Seoul, as part of broader efforts to protect domestic industries from worsening supply disruptions, has banned naphtha exports to shore up local supplies of the key petrochemical that has a wide range of uses, such as in the production of plastics, chips and cars. Senior correspondent Lee Mong-suk has more on other mitigation efforts by the government.
South Korea is rolling out emergency energy-saving measures to respond to possible oil supply disruption caused by the Middle East crisis. Besides calling for the public to turn off lights and take shorter showers, this week it says it began enforcing a mandatory 5-day vehicle restriction system for public sector workers, limiting driving based on license plate numbers. Officials say the measure could affect around 1.5 million vehicles and save thousands of barrels of oil a day, as authorities brace for a prolonged energy crunch. Now, if the crisis drags on, authorities warn these restrictions could expand to all drivers nationwide, something not seen since the oil shock during the Gulf War in the 1990s. Fuel costs spiked after the latest crisis began, forcing the government to impose price controls on petrol. And while prices have since stabilized, calls for an end to the Iran war are growing here in South Korea 1 month into the conflict as geopolitical and economic risks grow.
The war on Iran also testing the strength and limits of global alliances, especially with Asia's major powers that must balance pursuing their own regional priorities while maintaining cooperation with the US. We spoke with our correspondents in China and Japan for their take.
When Ms. Takaichi was in Washington last week, one of her top priorities, according to the Japanese Foreign Ministry, was to reaffirm U.S. commitment in the Indo-Pacific as well as to strengthen the U.S.-Japan alliance. And in terms of Indo-Pacific, that was realized based on a statement released from the White House stating the two countries will bolster deterrence to advance a free and open Indo-Pacific. This included U.S. commitment to peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait as an indispensable element of regional security and global prosperity, and opposition to any attempt to unilaterally change the status quo, including by force or coercion. Now, this statement doesn't name China, but it does give hint. Ms. Takaichi has strained ties with Beijing after her comment last November referring to a possible Taiwan contingency as a crisis of national existence. In other words, implying the right to exercise collective self-defense, and that means with the United States. Now, Ms. Takaichi told Mr. Trump when they met she was open to dialogue with Beijing. She wished for stable China-U.S. ties. And Mr. Trump assured her he would convey her message to the Chinese president when he visits China, now set for May.
Well, China has access here, but access comes with limits. Beijing has kept channels open with Tehran. Its Middle East envoy, Zai Jun, has been active, including meeting Iran's ambassador in Beijing in March this month. China's foreign minister was also in a phone call with his Iran counterpart this week. So China is involved. It does have a line into one of the key players, but access is not the same as leverage. And leverage is not the same as neutrality. China has a close strategic relationship with Iran, and that gives Beijing some influence. It remains an important economic partner, especially on energy. But that same relationship also makes it harder for China to present itself as a truly neutral broker. So the most realistic reading is China can help lower the temperature. It can pass messages, it can encourage restraint, it can support diplomatic off-ramp if the parties are looking for one, but it is much less likely to be the power that delivers a full settlement. Beijing's motives here are also very practical. It wants to prevent a wider regional war, protect key energy and trade routes, and show that China still has diplomatic weight in the Middle East. So yes, China can help keep channels open, but its role as a mediator should not be overstated.
Well, we'll get more insights on China's response to the conflict later this hour when we speak with Dr. Alessandro Arduino, Associate Fellow of International Security at the London-based think tank RUSI. Fresh attacks are continuing between Iran, the US and Israel, even as indirect contacts between the parties remain underway. And in a sign tensions are still overshadowing diplomacy, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi doubled down on his criticism against the US and Israel.
Iran has never sought war. Iranians are a peaceful, noble nation inheriting one of the richest civilizations on earth. Yet, they have demonstrated absolute resolve and determination to defend themselves against the brutal aggressors who know no boundary in perpetrating all sorts of crimes, a defense that shall persist as long as needed.
Iran's Revolutionary Guards today urging civilians to keep away from areas where U.S. forces are stationed to avoid possible harm. They have also warned vessels against transiting the Strait of Hormuz, threatening consequences for those that do. Attacks against regional infrastructure persists, with Kuwait saying one of its ports under China's Belt and Road Initiative was damaged by Iranian drones. This comes as Gulf states condemned Tehran of blatant and criminal attacks on their energy infrastructure. Israel's military says it had conducted a wave of strikes in the heart of Tehran. The army also claiming responsibility for targeting Iran's main missile and sea mine production facility in the central city of Yazd. The Israeli forces, meanwhile, have deployed more of its troops into Lebanon to expand a so-called buffer zone in the area. Now, U.S. President Donald Trump maintaining indirect talks with the Iranians are going well. He warned taking control of Iran's oil is an option if no agreement to end the war is reached. Iranian officials have earlier rejected Washington's 15-point peace plan as one-sided and unfair. They say it lacks the minimum requirements for success, as it only serves U.S. and Israeli interests. And Mr. Trump has extended the deadline for Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, now set for April the 6th. It was to have expired this weekend after an initial 5-day extension. The U.S. leader is also postponing strikes on Iranian power plants, reportedly at Tehran's request. An expert we spoke with weighs in on what he thinks the strategy is behind the U.S.'s 10-day pause on strikes.
Washington has adopted a two-pronged strategy. I mean, one is to push for some sort of a dialogue with the Iranians, and on the other hand, they also want to really maintain the pressure on the Iranian government by sending more troops to the region and sending very clear signals so that if Tehran does not really agree to some of the demands of the United States, then President Trump will be prepared to intensify military operation, particularly against the electricity grids of Iran. So I think we are getting really different signals from Washington, but at the same time, we are also getting different signals from Tehran. I mean, on the one hand, the Iranian government has dismissed the possibility of a settlement because they've claimed that there is no negotiation going on. They've just received messages from Washington than anything else, and that is through Pakistan. And then, on the other hand, also the Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has come out and said that we want to really continue this war so that the United States and Israel will never be again in a position to attack Iran. And he's also been saying that we are achieving our military goals, and we are moving fast towards achieving what we set out to do.
Gulf states have issued a joint statement on their right to self-defense in a response to Iran's continued attacks on their energy infrastructures. AP correspondent Philip Crowther tells CNA how this may mark an escalation for the region.
There certainly is a serious risk of this war becoming larger in scope. It already encompasses quite a lot of countries, but it's really always worth remembering that the Gulf countries, including the UAE, where I am here, which has been bearing the brunt of the Iranian retaliatory strikes on Gulf countries, they all so far retain what they would describe as a defensive posture. What that means is they shoot Iranian ballistic missiles and drones out of the sky. A very large percentage of these drones, and they still are sent in this general direction every single day, they do not reach their targets. There are, of course, exceptions, and we're very aware of those. But there is almost a worst-case scenario that these Gulf countries are looking at, a possible entry of theirs into this war. There are those threats from President Trump, of course, to attack power plants in Iran. And as a response, Iran has already said that it would attack energy infrastructure in Gulf countries, the likes of Saudi Arabia, but also Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, and here in the UAE. And that would be considered a very, very serious escalation. And that is when Gulf countries might change their position and go from a defensive attitude to an offensive one. And what that means is they would potentially, or at least one of them, Saudi Arabia, maybe the most likely, maybe the UAE as well, they could potentially attack Iran in conjunction with Israel and the United States. And there you would have that very significant escalation.
A U.S. Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, has arrived in France, where he's set to discuss the situation in the Middle East with G7 foreign ministers in Versailles. This after President Trump again criticized NATO for not helping the U.S. in its campaign against Iran, saying he was disappointed.
Right now, he's just making the observation that, I think there was a couple of the leaders in Europe who said that this was not Europe's war. Well, Ukraine is not America's war, and yet we've contributed more to that fight than any other country in the world. So it'll be something to examine. The president will have to take into account down the road.
Secretary Rubio will be looking to rally Europe to support the war amid strains across the Atlantic over a range of other issues, including tariffs. Canada is reportedly urging G7 members to collectively back a de-escalation of the war on Iran. They're hoping to narrow differences with the US while keeping other crises like Ukraine and Gaza high on the agenda. Still to come on East Asia tonight, how the conflict has created challenges for Gulf carriers who have built their businesses on large hubs in the region. Welcome back as we check in with Roland Lim for the business news and also a roundup of the markets at the end of the trading week, Roland.
Yeah, it's not doing well, not with oil prices rising once again. Investors still on the edge over the war on Iran, leaving markets in Asia mixed, while bond yields are rising on worries that central banks may tighten monetary policy to combat inflation due to surging oil prices. In Japan, the Nikkei 225 slipping 0.4%, but still managing to hold a modest gain for the week, helped by exporters. In South Korea and Taiwan, tech-heavy markets came under pressure as higher global yields and energy fears weighed on chips and electronic names. Over in China, blue chips bucking the trend. The Shanghai Composite ending the day 0.6% higher. Shenzhen doing better, 1.1%. And the benchmark Hang Seng Index up 0.4%. And that's on reports that Beijing may relax shareholding rules for key investors, giving a boost to banks and financial counters. Oil prices are easing this week, but they're still very high. Now, Brent crude trading around the $109 a barrel. That's down 4% on the week. U.S. benchmark West Texas Intermediate also sitting near $96. It's off almost 5% for the week. The conflict has already knocked an estimated 11 million barrels a day out of global supply. And analysts warn prices could surge towards $200 if the war drags into the middle of the year. The fighting has triggered what the International Energy Agency calls the greatest energy security threat in history. With the Strait of Hormuz effectively blocked, a fifth of the world's oil and LNG are held hostage. And the most vulnerable? Asia. Nearly 90% of the oil and gas passing through the strait goes to Asian countries. The crunch sparked a big jump in oil prices as countries scramble for alternative supplies and managed energy use at home. Brent crude has surged more than 50% since the war started last month, while the WTI more than 40%. Now, prices have seen big swings on either direction, reflecting daily headlines of war. Traders are weighing hopes of an end to the conflict with the possibility of an extended clash. But for the IEA's chief, it all boils down to the narrow passageway.
The single most important solution to this problem is opening up the Hormuz Strait, as things stand now.
The oil shock has resulted in stock market pain for Asia too. The tech-driven gains before the war gave way to selling pressure as investors dumped Asian equities. The region's market vulnerability partly stems from lots of money that flowed in ahead of the conflict, chasing the AI boom. So South Korea and Japan, the previous outperformers, are now the leading decliners. It's not just investors or traders hit hard. Everyone is set to feel the energy crunch. Long queues at petrol pumps are a common sight. In India, restaurants are shortening hours and in some cases shutting down due to shortage in LPG. Bangladesh closed universities to save power, while Vietnam, the Philippines and Thailand are encouraging remote work.
In terms of the magnitude of impact, I would say that the Southeast Asian economies like Thailand, Vietnam, Philippines tend to be more adversely impacted. I would put India in the same group as also being quite energy intensive, energy dependent on energy imports, but not significant amount of strategic reserves in place.
High energy costs are driving up inflation, and that's putting pressure on Asian currencies against a strong dollar. Weaker currencies could only make inflation worse by lifting the cost of imports. It could also weigh on government finances as they increase subsidies and support measures. The aviation sector also feeling the impact of the war on Iran. Now, in Asia, Hong Kong's Cathay Pacific yesterday said it was hiking fuel surcharges on all flights by 34% due to rising oil costs. Malaysia's Asia X also saying it's making some adjustments to fares across its network, but describing the measure as temporary. And the Gulf hub models of Dubai, Doha, and Abu Dhabi are taking a hit, with flight cancellations and what airlines call sweeping pauses because of missile threats. These hubs were seen as reliable and stable, but is no longer guaranteed. And so the global network has started to shift. And because of that, the whole global air traffic map is being redrawn. Now, since pilots can't fly over large parts of the Middle East anymore, everyone is being squeezed into these tiny safe lanes over the Caucasus and Central Asia, as you can see from this map. Now, that's adding up to 3 hours for some journeys. It's not just frustrating for passengers, but it's a nightmare for air traffic control to manage. Now, detours means more fuel is needed, and jet fuel prices have surged sharply. So airlines are paying more for fuel and need even more fuel because they're now flying longer routes. It's a double squeeze from both sides. Lufthansa says it's only making about 10 euros per passenger, so it can't absorb these costs. We're also seeing operational changes we haven't seen in years, like the return of technical refueling stops. So basically, planes having to land halfway just to fuel up because they can't carry enough fuel to take the long way around in one go. And on top of that, a growing insurance problem with war risk premiums spiking or coverage being pulled entirely. It's, in some cases, airlines can't operate legally, even if they wanted to. And that's driving a shift in where people connect. With the Gulf hubs ruled out, passengers and airlines are looking for more stable transit points. Southeast Asia, especially Singapore, is becoming a kind of safe harbor of sorts. It's outside of the conflict zone and operations are still predictable. And we have more coverage on the impact of the war on the aviation sector on our website, cna.asia. We can also get the latest with updates on our mobile app. Now, China's industry saw one of their best starts to the year since 2018, barring the post-pandemic revival, with profits up 15.2% from the year before. The figures from the country's Statistics Bureau suggest that the world's second-largest economy is recovering from a years-long deflationary slump. The data showing profits from computer, communications, and electronics equipment manufacturing tripling, while non-ferrous metal smelting and rolling processing profits are up 150% on year for the January to February period. But the war on Iran is casting a shadow on further recovery due to surging energy and commodity prices. Analysts have warned that elevated energy prices could bleed into transportation and feedstock costs, dampening recovery in several sectors. Now, China has launched retaliatory trade investigations against the U.S. The Commerce Ministry saying the move is in response to Washington's probes, which are looking into unfair trade practices to 16 partners and alleged forced labor in 60 economies. Both investigations include China and hold the possibility of fresh levies from the U.S. Beijing's 2 inquiries is targeted at Washington's alleged disruption to the global supply chain and trade of renewable energy products. Now, they are scheduled to conclude within 6 months, but may be extended by 3 months. The Commerce Ministry adding that some U.S. measures may be in violation of World Trade Organization rules and bilateral agreements. China's action is highlighting the friction it has with the U.S. ahead of President Trump's visit on the 14th of May. Beijing has yet to confirm the event, but only typically does so closer to the date. And that is the latest in business, Jill.
I appreciate it, Roland. Coming up on East Asia tonight, how China, widely considered one of Iran's most important strategic and economic partners, is positioning itself in the conflict in the Middle East. We check in with an expert from a London-based think tank on how Beijing could emerge from the war in Iran. You're with East Asia tonight. Here are the headlines we're following. East Asian economies contending with mounting energy pressures and rising costs. Nearly 1 month into the war in Iran that shows little signs of easing. The US extends its deadline for Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. President Donald Trump also delaying planned strikes on Iranian power plants, saying indirect talks with Iran are progressing. And the United States accuses China of detaining Panama flag ships at Chinese ports in an apparent punitive measure against the Central American nation for seizing 2 Panama Canal ports operated by Hong Kong-based CK Hutchison. "30 days since the US and Israel launched attacks on Iran, global actors have responded in different and, in some cases, increasingly distinct ways to the conflict, with positions shaped by domestic security interests, regional exposure, and energy concerns. Now, in the Gulf, the focus has been firmly on security, such as protecting critical infrastructure and safeguarding energy routes. But that position could evolve. According to reports, some of Tehran's largest Gulf Arab neighbors are considering whether to take on a more direct role should attacks on their critical infrastructure ramp up. Europe, meanwhile, has taken a cautious approach. While some countries continue to support US military operations through bases across the continent, the broader European response has stopped short of direct involvement. The EU, as well as individual countries, have condemned the strikes and sought to avoid further escalation. Over to East Asia, major economies of Japan, South Korea and China have taken relatively measured positions, but Beijing stands apart as it has significantly more at stake. As the main buyer of Iranian oil, the response by the world's second-largest economy carries importance, not only diplomatically but economically as well. At the same time, China has maintained high-level engagement with Tehran while positioning itself as a neutral diplomatic actor who can keep in contact with all sides while continuing its call for restraint and dialogue. Well, to further unpack not just how China is responding to the crisis, but also what it reveals about Beijing's interests, its influence and room to maneuver, we're joined by Dr. Alessandro Arduino, Associate Fellow at International Security at RUSI. Dr. Arduino, welcome. Look, all eyes on China. It's a key partner to Tehran as well as a major buyer of its oil. Has this war forced China to rethink the risk and its operations in and with the Middle East?
Personally, I don't believe that China is altering its view on the Middle East. For decades, Chinese security analysts have considered the Middle East a quagmire. Therefore, today, conflict and risk, I do believe, is still sharpening Beijing's view of the region. Definitely, Beijing is in full crisis management mode, but the writing was already on the wall. It's not a sharp surprise like it happened in Venezuela. But as Venezuela is a pillar of energy security for China in Latin America, Iran is also a pillar of Chinese energy security, as most of the crude come directly from Tehran, and the closing of the Strait of Hormuz create a major problem. But again, as I said, Chinese view of the Middle East is not going to change, especially in Iran, and predictably China is going to avoid any kind of entanglement, preserving its own peculiar strategic flexibility. And most important, is going to avoid any kind of military commitment to the region.
So do you still believe that that position will remain if Iranian oil becomes even harder for China to secure? What do you think its next move might be? Would it start to diversify, double down, or maybe push harder into that diplomatic avenue?
Both possibilities are on the table. China is already starting to doubling down on diversification. Stockpiling, overland road, energy transition are all possibilities. I do believe now the higher crisis will be not just with the persistently close of the Strait of Hormuz, but if Iran is going to push one of its proxy in Yemen to close the other strait, the one on the Red Sea of Bab al-Mandeb. This is going to generate a huge crisis, not only for China, but for all the global logistic and energy moving from Europe even to Japan. So in this respect, I still believe that the Chinese diplomacy is working. There are some talk right now that some of the oil carriers are moving, especially Chinese, Pakistani, Iraqi, and Russia. But we don't have to forget that war at sea is chaotic, is not so straightforward. Therefore, targeting precisely a ship against the other, because it's very complex to understand who is the owner, what the good is carried on. So definitely this is not going to be an easy choice if Iran still persists to keep Hormuz closed.
Yeah, and if that continues, what you've just mentioned, how exposed will China be? Is it a threat of inflation that's the biggest facing China right now? Or is it more that it's going to hit the Chinese exports if global demand actually slows?
I mean, first and foremost is a threat for rising inflation, but China still, contrary to other regions, like Europe, for example, has the financial capability and the strategic stockpile to absorb for weeks or even months rising inflation. The problem is that higher energy costs, shipping and insurance costs will amount to a weaker global demand. And then it's going indirectly to hurt China pretty badly. Therefore, we can see that in the short term, China is going definitely to increase its diplomatic pressure. But also there is something that is happening right now and is favorable to China, meaning that in the future, not too far, the Gulf is going to look more to the east than to the west. Therefore, while now barrels are priced in dollar, we can see that there is a chance in the future not too far to have a kind of petro-yuan, meaning that the price will be paid directly in renminbi.
Okay, now just to change tack a little bit, do you believe that China still has the capacity to meaningfully shape outcomes? Does it have leverage with Tehran, or is this where Beijing's influence and partnerships kind of hit a ceiling? And I just want to point to you one example of reports from Kuwait saying that the ports, one of its ports, was damaged after coming under attack from Iranian drones. Now, it's important to recognize that this facility is China's Belt and Road Initiative, or part of that initiative. And it's the first time such an attack has happened. What does this say about China's meaningful influence?
I mean, the attack on the Gulf state came as a surprise. I was in Oman. I landed in Oman just 3 hours before the Iranian attack started. And then up to now, China is still perceived as having a kind of credibility gap, meaning has, as a great power, the chance to influence outcome, but is still not willing to put the pressure in doing that. Of course, we have to remember that China started to increase its diplomatic pressure in the region in 2023, brokering an unprecedented rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran. But now, since the increase of conflict is shaping the region, China retired to a more usual playbook that is related just to hedging its bet. But we don't have to forget that it's not a military alliance. Iran is very important to China, but Tehran is a strategic partner is not a strategic
interesting point.
ally.
You talked about reverting to their playbook. Let's look at their playbook. Let's look at China's playbook compared to America's playbook, because this war has really laid out fundamental differences between how China builds their partnership and how America builds its alliances.
I mean, straightforwardly, American-built alliance and China partnership, as you correctly mentioned, and U.S. security umbrella is right now full on display in protecting the airspace of Qatar, of Oman, of other regions in the country. The attack on Dubai were more than 900 drone attacks per day. But at the same time, we don't have to forget that Gulf countries have agency in choosing between the United States and China. Definitely, China will have the chance in Iran, for example, to play an important role in reconstruction, as it has the financial capability in doing that. And at the same time, the US is showing that, yes, is a hard security provider. It can provide to its ally security umbrella, but this time, more than in the past, it went to war without full consultation with the allies. It's something that is being discussed right now in Paris during the G7, and diplomats from Qatar are flying as we speak to Washington to discuss how to develop better protection and the sale of military assistance weapon to protect the country. Therefore, these partnerships are very different. President Trump showed that he was very displeased with its allies from Europe to Australia because there was not the help that he sought to. But at the same time, US and Israel start to act without any kind of consultation. So this is one of the issues that will give, in my opinion, to Beijing more possibility in the future, not too far, to interact with the region. And yes, Beijing is definitely an economic juggernaut, but also is inserting itself as a security one in selling of some kind of security equipment from Saudi Arabia to the Gulf and to other parts of the Middle East.
Well, we want to thank you for your time. We leave it there for now. Dr. Alessandro Arduino, Associate Fellow at International Security at RUSI. Well, the Iranians have been leaving the country for safer places amid ongoing US and Israeli strikes. But with the country's skies closed, many making the journey out by foot, car and train. A key crossing is the Kapiköy border in eastern Türkiye, from where Ross Cullen filed this report for CNA.
This is the Kapiköy border crossing between Türkiye and Iran, one of the main land transit points between the two countries. There are Iranians who are leaving their country, and they are among the 3 million Iranians who've been displaced since this war began 1 month ago. The bus from Tehran can take hours, and the train almost a day to get here. But for these Iranians, it's a journey worth taking to get to safer ground in Türkiye. Many of them have witnessed airstrikes, telling me that their children are too scared to stay. Most of the Iranians I spoke with declined to appear on camera for fear of reprisals, but those who did shared mixed feelings about the war.
Savaş hakkında bizde teslim olmak yok. İsrail ve Amerika dünyada onların arkasında olsa bizde teslim yok. Buradan da hamileyi
İran'da çok problemin var. Yani insan hukukları da bozulur. Biz de devletten de narahatçılığımız olar ama başka ülkeler bize hücum getirse o da Amerika, emperyalizm Amerika'nın karşısında biz devam mukavemet edeceğiz.
Want peace. It's not nice. They say we want that to America. We want that to Israel. What's that? We are tired to war. They think everybody is enemy, but we are seeing who is the real enemy.
There is fear and frustration, but activity here at the Kapiköy crossing has been orderly. Türkiye is currently not facing a massive influx of refugees like it did during the Syrian civil war. It's also not just one-way traffic here. During our time at this crossing, we saw hundreds of people heading back into Iran to see family, to get home, to try to return to work. And more than the movement of people, trade continues to flow, with haulage firms and freight trains still making their way through the mountains. About 100 kilometres away from the border, the trains pull into the station in the city of Van, the nearest major settlement to the crossing. Van has a large Iranian community, and many businesses are Iranian-owned. Unsurprisingly, hotel occupancy is down, and the sector is taking a hit, as visitor numbers from Iran have plunged.
Savaşın dediğim gibi bir an önce bitmesini talep ediyoruz. Haliyle en çok etkilenen sektör bizim sektörümüz turizm sektörü oldu. Konaklama ile ilgili Van'da 30.000 kapasite yatağımız var. Haliyle işte Nevruz Bayramı tam kapasiteyle geçmiş yıllarda.
The city also has an airport, and several of the Iranians we spoke to said they were headed to Istanbul, a major international flight hub. Türkiye has condemned both sides in the conflict, and it has faced incoming Iranian missiles. But right now, it offers more safety than Iranian families can get back home. With Iran's airspace closed, land borders like this have become a crucial lifeline, the only way in or out for now. For CNA, I'm Ross Cullen at the Kapiköy border crossing in eastern Türkiye.
South Korea's retail investors, known locally as ants, have piled into the stock market despite its sharpest swings on record. Their buying spree highlights the increasingly prominent role of individual investors, even as concerns grow over the broader outlook due to the war over Iran.
Amid a grueling schedule at school in preparation for a career in foreign service, 24-year-old South Korean Kim Min-sung takes as many side gigs as he can. That is to fund his other preoccupation, day trading.
저는 이제 계좌를 두 개로 나눠서 운영하고 있는데 하나는 정말 안전하게 모아서 나중에 부동산을 사려는 목적으로 모아가는 계좌가 하나 있고요. 다른 하나 계좌는 정말 원하는 대로 불려가지고 경제적인 자유를 누릴 수 있는 그런 계좌 두 종류로 나눠서 운영을 하고 있습니다.
Kim says he's unfazed by this month's volatility, with stocks seesawing wildly amid the war in the Middle East. And he is far from alone. South Korea's retail investors are known locally as ants, individually small but collectively mighty, and they have turbocharged a world-beating doubling in the country's benchmark Kospi index over 6 months. It rallied to an all-time peak on February 27th, a day before war broke out in the Middle East. On March 4th, the index plunged 12%, its biggest daily loss ever. But instead of cashing out, the nation's 14 million ants have doubled down. This month saw average daily trading volume go above 40 trillion won, or almost $27 billion for the first time. On Monday alone, retail investors bought a record $4.6 billion worth of stocks, even as the Kospi slumped 6.5%. Kwon Sun-kook, a full-timer at a retail company in Seoul, used this month's sell-off to buy more stocks at a discount.
아무래도 가장 큰 단어는 그냥 불확실성인 것 같아요. 언제 고용이 끝날지 모르고 제 벌이가 언제 끝날지 모르고 그리고 자녀에게 어떻게 돈이 들어갈지 모르는 이런 모든 것도 알 수 없는 리스크가 가득한 상황들이니까.
Some analysts caution against over-enthusiasm amid the geopolitical uncertainty. Sia Sung-young of Mirae Asset Securities says if the war drags on, the economy will inevitably face significant disruption.
우리 한국은 수출 의존도가 높은 나라라서 대외 변수에 그렇기 때문에 민감할 수밖에 없어요. 그 대외 변수가 글로벌 경기가 위축이 된다. 그러면 한국의 수출이 감소하게 되면 당연히 기업이익이 빠지니까 당연히 주가는 하락을 하는 거고.
On Friday morning, the Kospi was down another 3%, but that probably didn't worry the ants.
Coming up on East Asia tonight, Singapore and Hong Kong agree to look for new ways to collaborate amid global geopolitical challenges. Welcome back. The United States is accusing China of detaining Panama-flagged ships at Chinese ports in an apparent punitive measure against a Central American nation. The chair of the U.S. Federal Maritime Commission says it is closely monitoring a surge in detentions of Panama-flagged vessels in China that appears tied to a Panama court ruling against Hong Kong-based CK Hutchison over its port assets in the Panama Canal. China says its position on the seizure of the Panama Canal ports was clear, without directly addressing the U.S. accusations of ship detentions. And Panama last month seized control of 2 Panama Canal ports operated by a C.K. Hutchison subsidiary after its Supreme Court invalidated a concession granting the subsidiary the right to do so. And China has said it firmly opposes the ruling, calling it an act of bad faith. C.K. Hutchison, which operated the ports for nearly 30 years, strongly rejected the ruling, accusing Panamanian authorities of unlawfully seizing property and launching an international arbitration case against Panama, claiming damages of more than $2 billion. In other news, Singapore and Hong Kong have agreed to identify new areas of collaboration on top of upholding multilateralism and free trade amid external geopolitical challenges. Now, this comes after talks between Singapore Prime Minister Lawrence Wong and Hong Kong Chief Executive John Lee at the Hong Kong leader's official residence. This is Mr. Wong's first official visit to Hong Kong as Prime Minister. It's also the first time a Singapore Prime Minister has visited the city since 2014. It follows his trip to the Chinese province of Hainan, where he attended the Boao Forum. Mr. Wong says he looks forward to learning more about Hong Kong's new 5-year plan, the city's first socio-economic roadmap for the next 5 years. The development blueprint, which will be released by year-end, is expected to focus heavily on technology and stronger integration with mainland China.
And while there is some competition from time to time, I think it is healthy competition. And more importantly, when we connect with one another, the pie grows and we both benefit because we both believe in free trade, we both believe in rules-based multilateralism, and the connections between our two cities, I think, are more important than ever in a world that's becoming more fragmented and where barriers are going up.
And we have a long-standing friendship. We also have a lot of common beliefs. We believe in free trade. We believe in multilateralism. We believe in rules-based organizations such as the United Nations, WTO. We believe in building bridges, dialogues, and collaboration. And we believe in win-win, creating a bigger cake for everybody.
Earlier, Mr. Wong met with the city's business leaders. He will also visit the northern metropolis, the city's emerging economic zone, and attend a reception with Hong Kong-based Singaporeans. Singapore and Hong Kong have strong economic relations and exchanges. They are each other's 5th largest trading partner in 2025. Cherry blossoms, also known as sakura, are among Japan's most beloved symbols. And after days of rain in Tokyo, they are finally bursting into full bloom. It's prompting crowds to flock to parks to catch a glimpse of the seasonal event, with famous viewing spots such as Ueno Park transforming into shades of pink and white. The tradition known as hanami, or flower viewing, brings people gathering under the trees to eat, drink and enjoy the blossoms. The start of Tokyo's cherry blossom season began on March the 19th. That's 5 days earlier than last year and ahead of the usual average. The blossoms are also drawing visitors from around the world. Well, that burst of pink also in Washington, D.C., from cherry trees gifted by Japan to the United States more than a century ago. The spectacle, one of the most recognizable signs of spring, draws hundreds of thousands of visitors to the U.S. Capitol each year. The full bloom coincides with the month-long Cherry Blossom Festival, featuring Japanese cultural events, musical performances and fireworks.
It's a kind of a gift from Japan, right? So it's a kind of a nature, different kind of nations all together. So that's kind of a integration for me. So I think that makes me, wow, thinking about all those things could be working together.
Well, I work in diplomacy, and this is a long-lasting, beautiful gift from nation to nation, which we are just, it's a beautiful example, especially right now.
A lovely way to bring Friday's edition of East Asia Tonight to an end. But don't forget headlines anytime at cna.asia, Facebook and YouTube. Bye-bye.